Today I want to tell you something that most women will not want to hear, but that every woman deserves to understand before it is too late to change anything. Good men do not stop fighting for their marriages all at once. There is no single morning where a man wakes up and decides he is done. It happens the way most important things in a marriage happen. Slowly, quietly, one small withdrawal at a time, until the day arrives when his wife looks across the room and realizes the man who used to fight for her has stopped fighting entirely, and she cannot point to the moment it happened because there was no single moment. There were 1,000 small ones. Today, I am going to name 7 specific reasons good men stop fighting for their women and their marriages. Not because these men stopped loving, but because they learned gradually and painfully that fighting for this particular relationship no longer produced anything worth the cost of trying. The Roman philosopher and Stoic Seneca observed that it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. And what a man wastes when he fights alone for a marriage that no longer meets him with equal effort is not just his time. It is his hope, his sense of self, and his belief that love can actually be a reciprocal exchange rather than a one-sided offering that is never fully returned. Reason number 1, he stopped believing his effort would ever be enough. There was a time when he tried, he planned the date, he remembered the anniversary, he made the gesture he thought would land, and what came back was not gratitude. It was a comparison, a critique, a version of thank you that carried something underneath it, communicating that the effort, while noted, still fell short of what should have been done or how it should have been done or when. Each individual response had a reason behind it. The date was nice, but it could have been more thoughtful. The gesture was appreciated, but a friend's husband did something similar and did it better. None of it was said with cruelty. Most of it was said as passing observation, but look at what accumulates across years of a man trying and receiving the message that trying was not quite sufficient. He does not conclude that he needs to try harder. He concludes that there is no version of effort that produces the outcome he is looking for, which is to feel like enough. So he stops offering the effort, not because he no longer loves her, but because a man does not keep spending himself in a place that has taught him spending does not work. The philosopher Epictetus taught that it is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows, and a man who has learned through years of experience that his effort is never quite enough has internalized a lesson that is incredibly difficult to unlearn. He knows his effort will fall short because he has been shown that it does, repeatedly and consistently, and once that lesson is learned, the motivation to keep trying evaporates. Tell him specifically what would make him feel like enough and receive what he offers as sufficient, even when it is imperfect. A man who feels like his effort lands is a man who keeps offering it. But a man who feels like his effort is always being measured against an invisible standard he can never quite reach will eventually stop reaching. Not because he is lazy or indifferent, but because the cost of reaching and being told it is still not quite right is higher than the cost of simply not reaching at all. Reason number 2, he got tired of being the only one repairing things after every conflict. Every marriage has conflict. What separates the marriages that last from the ones that do not is not the presence of conflict. It is what happens after. In this marriage, after every disagreement, he was the one who circled back. He was the one who apologized first, even for things that were not entirely his fault because the alternative was a silence that could stretch for days. He was the one who initiated the conversation that repaired the distance every time regardless of who caused it. She told herself this was simply how their dynamic worked, that he was better at these conversations, that she needed time and he did not. What she did not see was a man doing the emotional labor of repair alone over and over while she waited to be reached rather than reaching herself. A man can carry that for a long time. But eventually, carrying the entire weight of reconciliation in a partnership becomes its own kind of exhausting, one that has nothing to do with the original conflict and everything to do with being the only one who ever seems to want peace badly enough to build the bridge back to it. So he stops building it. Not out of spite, but out of depletion. The psychologist Carl Jung observed that the meeting of 2 personalities is like the contact of 2 chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But when only one personality is doing the transforming, when only one person is adjusting and repairing and reaching, the reaction becomes unbalanced. The relationship becomes less of a partnership and more of a one-way street where one person is perpetually doing the emotional work. Meet him halfway after conflict. The relationship survives on two people willing to repair it, not one person repairing it for both. A man who sees that his efforts at repair are matched by genuine effort from her will keep investing in those repairs. But a man who learns that he is the only one who ever reaches will eventually stop reaching entirely. Reason number 3, he watched his opinions get overruled so consistently that he stopped offering them. He had a thought about the vacation, a preference about the furniture, a view on how to handle something with the kids. He offered it the way a partner offers something in a shared decision. And what came back gently but consistently was the reason his view was not quite right, followed by the decision that was made anyway in the direction she had already wanted. This did not feel like conflict to her. It felt like having good judgment and using it. But from where he sat, a pattern was forming that had nothing to do with any single decision and everything to do with what his opinion was worth in this marriage, which, based on the evidence accumulating in front of him, was very little. A man who learns that his input does not change outcomes eventually stops offering input, not because he has none, but because offering it and watching it get set aside is more discouraging than simply going along. So he goes along and she experiences that as him not caring what happens. He cares. He just stopped believing caring out loud made any difference here. The philosopher Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic, wrote that we have power over our minds, not outside events. But when a man's input into his own marriage is consistently treated as an outside event rather than a valued contribution, he begins to feel powerless within the one place where he should feel most powerful. And that feeling of powerlessness is corrosive to his sense of identity and to his desire to participate fully in the relationship. Ask for his opinion and let it visibly move the decision sometimes, even when your instinct disagrees. A man who sees his voice matter keeps using it. A man who learns that his voice never matters stops speaking. The silence that follows is not the absence of thought. It is the presence of resignation. Reason number 4, he ran out of ways to prove his loyalty to a woman who kept looking for evidence he was not loyal. He was faithful in every sense that mattered. But loyalty in this marriage was never treated as a settled fact. It was treated as something under ongoing investigation. A phone glanced at. A friendship questioned. A late night at work that required an explanation more detailed than the situation warranted. Each individual instance had a reason behind it in her mind. A history somewhere. A fear that felt justified. But he was not living inside her history. He was living inside the daily experience of being treated like a suspect in a case where he had never committed the crime. And there is only so long a man can be cross-examined for a betrayal he did not commit before something in him quietly closes. He did not become distant because he had something to hide. He became distant because, being endlessly investigated for a loyalty he had already given, completely stopped feeling like a marriage and started feeling like a trial with no verdict that would ever be final. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche famously wrote that he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. But when a man is asked to bear the constant weight of suspicion without ever having done anything to warrant it, his why begins to erode. He starts to ask himself why he is enduring this, why he is staying in a place where his character is constantly being questioned. And when he cannot find a compelling answer, he stops enduring. Trust the loyalty that has been demonstrated and let the investigation end. A man who is treated as trustworthy tends to keep being exactly that. A man who is treated as if he is always about to betray will eventually wonder what is the point of staying faithful to someone who does not believe in his faithfulness. Reason number 5, he got exhausted competing with a version of himself she preferred that did not actually exist. Somewhere in her mind was a version of him, more attentive, more romantic, more emotionally fluent than the man standing in front of her actually was. She did not invent this cruelly. It came from other marriages she observed from a distance, from what culture had told her a good husband looks like, from the earliest months of their relationship when everything was easier because everything was new. And the real man, specific and particular and limited in the ordinary ways that real people are limited, kept being measured against this other version. Every time he fell short of it, she let him know, sometimes with words, more often with the specific disappointment in her voice that a man learns to recognize instantly. He cannot win a competition against someone who does not exist. Eventually, he understood that, and he stopped trying to close a gap that had nothing to do with his actual effort and everything to do with a fantasy he was never going to be able to outcompete. So, He settled into being exactly what he was without the added effort of reaching for a standard that was never real to begin with. The psychologist William James wrote that we are not only what we feel, but what we believe ourselves capable of. When a man is constantly told through subtle cues that he is not capable of being the husband she truly wants, he starts to believe he is not capable. He starts to see himself as a failure, not because he is one, but because the measure of success has been set at a level he can never reach. See the man in front of you as the whole relationship, not the runner-up to one you imagined. A man who is loved as himself keeps showing up as himself fully. A man who is always being measured against an impossible ideal will eventually stop trying to measure up and will simply become distant, because distance is less painful than perpetual failure. Reason number 6, he stopped feeling wanted and started feeling merely tolerated. Somewhere along the way, her attention toward him became functional rather than warm. She spoke to him about logistics, schedules, the children, the household. She rarely spoke to him the way people speak to someone they are still choosing, with warmth that has no task attached to it. He noticed the way a person notices the temperature of a room even when nobody names it. He was fed, managed, coordinated with. He was not desired, sought after, or missed. And a man can live for a long time on being useful. But being useful is not the same as being wanted. And eventually the difference between those two things becomes the loudest thing in the marriage. He stopped reaching for warmth he had learned was not there to reach for. Not because he stopped needing it, because reaching repeatedly into an empty space teaches a person to stop reaching. The philosopher Seneca observed that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. But for a man in this situation, the suffering is not in his imagination. It is in the cold reality of living with someone who no longer sees him as someone to be desired. Let him feel chosen, not just accommodated. A man who feels wanted keeps wanting to come home. A man who feels tolerated starts finding reasons to stay away, not because he does not care, but because being tolerated is painful in a way that being wanted is healing. And a man can only endure pain for so long before he begins to seek relief. Reason number 7, he decided the fight was no longer his to carry alone. A marriage is only sustained by two people who both believe it is worth fighting for. For a long time, he believed it enough for both of them. He absorbed the disappointments, initiated the repairs, offered the effort, defended the loyalty, competed with the fantasy, and reached for warmth that was not always returned. Because somewhere inside him was the conviction that this marriage mattered enough to keep doing all of it. But conviction that is carried by only one person in a partnership has a limit. Not because his love ran out, but because a fight sustained by one person eventually stops being a fight and starts being a burden. And a man does not stop loving his wife the day he sets that burden down. He simply reaches the point where continuing to carry it alone has become indistinguishable from carrying nothing at all. The philosopher Epictetus asked whether we should wish for things to happen as we wish, or to wish them to happen as they do happen. A man who has been fighting alone has been wishing for things to happen as he wishes. He has been hoping that his efforts would finally be met. And when those hopes are consistently disappointed, he eventually stops wishing. He accepts that the relationship is what it is, and he stops trying to change it. The Roman emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. When a man's thoughts are colored by the belief that his marriage is a burden rather than a partnership, his soul reflects that belief. He becomes distant. He becomes quiet. He becomes the man his wife no longer recognizes. Here is what I want every woman watching this to understand. These 7 things are not proof that your husband stopped loving you. They are proof that love unmet by reciprocity eventually runs out of places to put itself. He did not leave the fight because the marriage stopped mattering to him. He left it because he ran out of evidence that fighting for it alone was changing anything. The distance you are feeling from him right now is not indifference. It is exhaustion wearing the face of indifference, because exhaustion and indifference look identical from the outside, even though only one of them can be healed. That does not mean the fight is over. It means it has to become a fight both of you are actually in, not him carrying it while you observe it. It means it has to become a fight where both of you are choosing it daily in ways the other person can actually feel. The psychologist Carl Jung once wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And for a woman in this situation, accepting herself completely means accepting that she may have contributed to her husband's withdrawal. It means accepting that her comparisons, her critiques, her failure to meet him in the repair work, all of it has consequences. It means accepting that love is not something you receive passively. It is something you participate in actively. And if you have been passive in the fight for your marriage, you cannot be surprised when your husband stops fighting alone. There is an ancient Stoic concept called sympathia, the idea that all things are interconnected and that the health of the whole depends on the health of the parts. A marriage is a whole made of two parts, and the health of the marriage depends on the health of each partner's willingness to participate in its maintenance. When one partner stops participating, the whole begins to suffer. And when that suffering becomes chronic, the whole begins to break apart. Not because of a single catastrophic event, but because of 1,000 small failures to show up. Each of these 7 reasons is one of those failures. Not necessarily a failure of love, but a failure of expression, a failure of reciprocity, a failure of mutual effort. And each one can be repaired, but only if both parties are willing to do the work. The philosopher Seneca wrote that the greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today. If you are waiting for him to come back on his own, if you are waiting for him to start fighting again without any reason to believe that fighting will make a difference, you are waiting for something that will not come. The fight cannot be resumed by one person. It must be resumed by both. And that means she must be willing to meet him where he is, not where she wishes he was. She must be willing to acknowledge the ways she has contributed to his withdrawal. She must be willing to change her own behavior, to show him that she is now a partner in the fight rather than an observer of it. The psychologist Carl Rogers, one of the most influential figures in modern psychology, wrote that the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. And the same is true for a marriage. When she accepts the reality of what has happened, when she accepts her own role in it, then she can begin to change it. I want to hear from the men watching this. Which of these 7 reasons is the one you are living right now quietly without having said it out loud yet? Tell me in the comments, because the men who need to hear this named clearly are the ones still deciding whether to keep fighting or finally stop. Your voice matters. Your experience matters. And the fact that you are still watching, still searching for answers, still hoping that something can change, that is evidence that you have not fully given up yet. And that hope, even if it is battered and bruised, is worth acknowledging. And to the women watching, one question. If your husband described honestly the moment he started to step back, would you know which one it was? Sit with that question before you answer it. Do not rush to a defense. Do not rush to blame. Just sit with it, because the answer to that question is the beginning of understanding what has gone wrong. And understanding is the beginning of repair. The philosopher Epictetus wrote that it is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And right now, the most important reaction you can have is not to blame, not to defend, but to listen, to truly hear what he has been trying to say through his silence. To understand that his distance is not rejection, but protection. To understand that his withdrawal is not indifference, but exhaustion. To understand that the man you married is still there, just waiting for a reason to believe that fighting for this marriage is not a fool's errand. There is a reason the Stoic philosophers emphasized self-examination so heavily. They knew that the only way to change your life is to first understand it. And the same is true for a marriage. You cannot change the dynamic between you and your husband if you do not understand what that dynamic actually is. You cannot fix the distance if you do not know why it exists. And you cannot reignite the fight if you do not know what made him stop fighting. So examine. Reflect. Ask yourself the hard questions. And then, when you have some answers, have the conversation. Not the conversation where you accuse or defend, but the conversation where you listen. The conversation where you ask him directly which of these reasons resonates with him. The conversation where you tell him that you want to fight for this marriage too, not just observe him fighting for it. The conversation where you acknowledge that you have not been the partner you thought you were being. And then, after that conversation, show him. Show him with your actions that you are serious. Show him by meeting him halfway. Show him by letting his voice matter. Show him by treating his loyalty as settled. Show him by loving the man in front of you, not the fantasy version of him you have been comparing him to. Show him by wanting him, not just needing him. Show him by refusing to let him carry the fight alone. Because that, more than any grand gesture, is what will bring him back. That is what will make him believe that fighting for this marriage is worth it. That is what will reignite the love that has been dormant, not dead. The philosopher Marcus Aurelius wrote that the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts, and the quality of your thoughts about your marriage determines the quality of your marriage itself. If you think it is broken beyond repair, it will be. If you think it can be saved, it might. The difference is in your willingness to act on that belief. I will be back with more of what nobody else will say. And if this video helped you in one way or another, please consider supporting the channel using the Super Thanks feature. Your support means a lot, and it helps us keep creating better content specially for you. Every contribution goes directly into improving the quality of these videos and bringing you more of the Stoic wisdom and psychological insights that you have come to expect. Stay grounded, stay present, and I will see you right here in the next one.